After more than 2 weeks of unanswered questions, Calgary police say murder charges are imminent in the case of missing grandparents and their 5-year-old grandson. Last night, police brought the only known person of interest in the case, Douglas Garland, into the arrest processing unit. Although the bodies of Alvin and Kathy Lickness and Nathan O'Brien have not been recovered, police say they have enough evidence to lay 2 charges of first-degree murder and 1 of second-degree murder. Joining us now from downtown Toronto is former Toronto police detective and CEO of Investigative Solutions Network, Dave Perry. Thanks for coming on, Dave.
Good morning.
So let's start with police not formally identifying this suspect, although there is a person of interest who has been re-arrested. Why wouldn't they identify him at this point?
It's merely a formality or a technicality, if you will, where they're not going to release his name until he's officially charged. And to be officially charged, there has to be a sworn information in front of the courts. So they're just being very cautious by not releasing his name prior to that happening.
So an abundance of caution right now.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk about the charges, okay? Because we're hearing 2 first-degree murder charges, and this is for the Licknesses, and then a second-degree murder charge for the grandson, Nathan. How would this come about with no bodies being recovered?
It's a little bit unusual in a homicide investigation to have the charges laid prior to having bodies recovered, but it has happened in several cases across this country in the past little while. Really, all the police need to lay a charge is what we call reasonable grounds, and that's a very low threshold to lay a charge against somebody. But I'm going to suggest that in a case like this, a very high-profile case, obviously a very serious case, that they're not going to take that lightly. They've clearly got some very strong evidence against the individual that they're going to charge, and therefore they've decided not to wait until they make a body recovery to go ahead and process those charges.
And you talked about other cases, and one case that comes to mind would be the Tori Stafford case, where there was no body initially.
Yeah, in Tori Stafford's case, the 2 individuals that were arrested and charged for that were picked up quite some time prior to her body being found. And as a matter of fact, we do know now through the court records that the male party, I believe his name was Rafferty, he didn't cooperate with the police, but the female, McClintock, she did cooperate, although she had a difficult time helping them find where they had disposed of her body. But her body was eventually recovered.
The police chief said that they were quite confident with the evidence that they had gathered. And obviously, you know, you're not working on this case, but give us the parameters when it comes to evidence and police and the teams of police working on this case. Why and what kind of evidence would make them confident to lay these kinds of charges?
Well, I would suspect that we're looking at forensic evidence. I mean, we did hear from the beginning that the house was a scene of a violent crime. And, you know, when you have a scene of a violent crime, there's quite often transfer evidence, DNA evidence, and all kinds of other forensic evidence that can link the perpetrator to that particular crime scene. We heard a lot about a vehicle that was seen driving and captured on CCTV. And if that, in fact, is involved, and we can maybe assume for now that it is, there would likely be some additional forensic evidence that could be found in the vehicle, and much more information that I'm sure the police are uncovering as the investigation unfolds.
And talk a little bit about the teamwork involved here, because the police chief also noted that, you know what, there was no smoking gun here. This involved a lot of intensive work, a lot of people working around the clock, hundreds of police officers, in fact. That's some great police work.
I think it is some great police work, and I've been there on these cases, and it's never solved by one individual or even a pair of police partners, if you will. It takes hundreds of police officers to pull the whole thing together. And you're right, Marcy, I'm sure that there's a lot of officers who are going on 2 or 3 hours sleep for the last 2 weeks and are going to have to continue that, because now that the investigation is where it's at, we have people who have been charged, or a person who's being charged today. You know, the investigation really starts a second phase, which can be just as intense as it was to get to the point they're at right now. Clearly, the priority for the police and obviously for this poor family is to recover their loved ones. And, you know, with the searching that has taken place so far, with all of that searching of this farmland and dumps and lakes and so on, and not coming up with bodies, tells us that, you know, they don't have an indication of where they are at this point. And that search could have to go on for quite some time, unfortunately.
And through your expertise and what you've dealt with in other cases, Dave, and we've talked through the years about this, for the family, you know, obviously devastating, but the toll it must take when there are no bodies as of yet, because we're hearing family members who say, you know what, until we see something, you know, we're holding out hope.
Right, and for good reason, and we certainly understand them holding out that hope, but I can tell you that doing a number of these cases, that the key element here is now that the police have announced what their belief are, is that these 3 people have been murdered, the next most important thing is now to recover the bodies, and it's so important for families to have that kind of closure and to have some of the answers to the many questions that must be going through their minds right now.
Dave, thank you so much.
My pleasure.